Welcome back, guys, to Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, where in our first case turnabout Trump, Phoenix now points his fingers at Kristoph Gavin, saying, how did you know exactly about the bone china pate, which I've learned is literally just a word for forehead? Didn't know that word before, and now we all know. Like the years of the cards. The year of cards. We know so much more thanks to this game. Well, that said, Apollo is now on the trail. As we continue on. Spiraling down the rabbit hole, of course. That was when I began to see my good friend in a different light. Troubled, I returned to the crime scene. And when I spotted Mr. Smith's head again, I realised exactly what was wrong. Well, Mr. Gavin, the stage has been set. Perhaps you would like to explain this to the court. Exactly how did you come by your privileged knowledge of the victim's head? So, this is your reason. The reason why you put the victim's hat back on. Your point, Mr. Gavin? It's come down to this, has it, Phoenix Wright?
Order! I will have order! Mr. Payne!
Yes, Your Honor?
I believe this court has been left with no other choice. Are you prepared to hear Defense Attorney Gavin's testimony?
Well, as the prosecutor,
Very well. We'll break for 10 minutes. After which Mr. Gavin will take the stand for a cross-examination. Are we all clear on that?
Crystal clear, Your Honor.
Very well. This will be the final recess for the day.
Which the case has to be sold after this fact. April 20th, 2:32 PM. When do they knock off for the day, I wonder? Defendant lobby number 3. Mr. Gavin and Mr. Wright are both in the judge's chamber. Who'd have thought today would turn out like this? May I? Huh? What? Hello, sir. Please, pick a card. But what's all this about? Is this one okay? Excellent. I have a message for you. The last hand is about to be played. You'll need a trump card to make it. A trump card? The card you have chosen is magical. Use it wisely, and the game is yours. That's all. An ace. Where do I remember that card from? Mr. Smith's hand has 3 aces, and Mr. Wright's 2. It is 5 aces in all. It is true. I have seen it. The 5th ace. That was cheating, I swear to you. The missing 5th ace. Wait, this blotch of red. Is this blood? You have your trump card. Now it's up to you to cut the deck and draw. The truth. My father's fate is in your hands. I know you can do it. This bloodstained card is my trump card for finding the truth. I fell deep into thought as my mind raced to understand what this all meant. That girl, I seen her recently, but where? That's when I made the connection. The bloody ace has been added to the court record, and that locket is of a lot younger version of the girl before us. Well, that said, a 5th ace was present. What does this all mean? And where are the other 2?
Court will now reconvene. Defense Attorney Kristoph Gavin, will you please take the stand? Now then, if you would, Mr. Payne.
Yes, Your Honor. Will Mr. the witness state his name and occupation?
Is this farce necessary, Your Honor?
Believe me, far stranger things have gone on in this courtroom.
Fine, I'll play along.
First, there's one thing we need to have made clear. How did you know about the secret beneath the victim's hat?
By secret, I'm guessing he means the fact that Mr. Smith was bald. Forgive my curiosity, but what is it about this fellow's head? Your Honor seems to have an inordinate interest in it.
Objection!
Wait. They've reversed positions? I wouldn't call it inordinate, Mr. Gavin. Oh, the music. But, Mr. Wright! What do you think you're doing, Wright? Wow, things sure look different from the other side. You know what I mean, Apollo? Speaking of looking from the other side, let's consider something for a second. The victim wore that hat all night, never once taking it off, except for that one time. That one time? Being the instant he was hit.
Oh!
When Mr. Wright returned from reporting the crime, the hat was lying on the floor. Mr. Wright picked it up and placed it on the victim's head. In other words, in order to have seen Mr. Smith's bald head, you would have had to be at the scene of the crime, at the time of the crime. In other words, you would have to be the real killer. Is what you're trying to say. Not bad, Apollo.
Mr. Gavin?
I'm afraid that I haven't been entirely honest with the court. As usual. Why do I always give, like, the people who are possibly the evil people this voice and the posh voice? No, only evil people can be like this. No, that's not true. But still.
What?
Oh, I assure you, I had the noblest of intentions. I did it all to protect my client, Mr. Wright. Yet, I'm afraid in the current situation I see little reason to hide anything. Very well, allow me to tell you the truth of what happened that night.
Finally, you may begin your testimony. Tell us, how were you involved in the events of that fateful night?
Testimony, please. The rage I sensed in that man that night troubled me, so I returned to the club. I went down to the basement and peeked in through the little window to the hideout. It must have been right after the murder took place. The victim was dead, as he appears in the photo. A bald head, an unconscious girl, and Wright holding a bottle in his hand. I sensed that was not the best place for me to be at the time, and so I left. That's when the call came from Wright.
So, you witnessed the murder?
For better or worse, I missed the actual moment of the deed.
Mr. Gavin, may I remind you that you are on Mr. Wright's defense team? Your testimony is clearly disadvantageous to your client.
What else could I say? I'm standing on the witness's stand after all. So you are, Mr. Gavin. And you had to testify as you just did. You had to tell them you saw the scene of the crime through that little window. Mr. Wright? You had to say that. Because that was the only probable window opportunity. Right, Apollo? Oh.
Mr. Wright, the defense should do the cross-examination, not the defendant. Mr. Justice, are you prepared?
Yes, Your Honor. I can't believe I'm going to go up against Mr. Gavin. This trial is getting weirder and weirder. That fateful night. Now it's time to press. The rage I sensed in that man that night troubled me, so I returned to the club. Why would there be rage? That man, you mean Mr. Smith? He was different from the other customers. His aura, shall we say. I knew he was a serious poker player, but it was more than that.
So then you knew the true nature of your client's job?
Of course, but I also knew he wasn't engaged in gambling, which would be illegal. Well, it makes sense that he'd know. They were friends after all. Worried for my friend, I returned to the club. You see, I feared this Mr. Smith might be someone coming to settle an old score.
I see. What happened then?
I went down to the basement and peeked in through the little window to the hideout. A little window? You mean the one used to keep watch up the stairs? Yes, a relic of the ancient past. The Black Marketeers used it, I believe. Why did you go through the trouble of peeking in through the window? Wouldn't it have been easier to just open the door and go into the room? I didn't want to upset Wright. You see... See what? I don't know. Upset Mr. Wright? Yes, what if my fears had been unfounded? I'd be walking in on their match. Bad form, to say the least. So far, everything he's saying makes sense. It must have been right after the murder took place. The victim was dead, as he appears in the photo. Ah, I'm skipping. I'm just reading. I do wonder. I was wondering if he might have, like, his own tell at that point in time. When I started skipping through and seeing the animations, I thought, maybe there's something there. How do you know it was right after the murder? Really, no need to shout, Justice. I was just getting to that part of my testimony. Ah, there he is. The coolest defense in the West, we know and love. Even when you're standing up there on the witness stand, some things never change. I was afraid you'd change too, right? But you haven't. You and that overbearing personality of yours. With friends like these, who needs enemies? The victim was dead, as he appears in the photo. Now, you can't tell that for certain. By photo, you mean the second photograph of the crime scene? Precisely. You see, he wasn't wearing his hat then. I saw his head when he was dead. And then Mr. Wright came along and replaced his hat.
Can you describe the scene of the crime for us?
A bull's head, an unconscious girl, and Wright holding a bottle in his hand. Those were the only three at the scene of the crime? Yes, as far as I saw at least.
Then we're back where we started. The killer was the defendant, Phoenix Wright. Who else could it have been? But why didn't you talk to the police?
2 reasons. First, I didn't actually witness the very moment of the crime. Second, my office was asked to defend Wright. Even after seeing what I'd seen, I couldn't abandon my friend. There must have been someone else there at the moment of the crime. Justice, I just said I saw no one. Not a soul. But that goes against what Mr. Wright said. Ah yes, this mysterious 4th person. Who would conveniently be the real killer, I suppose. Glad to see we agree, Mr. Gavin. Let me pose a question then. Tell me, what possible reason did the real killer have to swap cards in the victim's hand? Perhaps you can show us a reason why such a thing would be necessary. How can I show something I can't find myself? Is the fact that it was to actually conceal, like, the impossibility? Because let's face it, if there was a face, it makes things ridiculously impossible. Also, wait. The blue tech was the one not being played. I know I paused for a fair bit there, not talking, but the blue deck was the one not being played. But the blue deck's a king. Which means the Phoenix's hand, he's the one with the ace of spades. Is either a switched card again, or it's also of the blue deck? It can't be the red deck if the ace we have is the red deck. Much confusement is in my head right now. The fact is, from the red deck is the most important thing here. Let's examine this though first. A single drop of blood marks the front of the card. It is, but it's the ace of spades. Very confusing. Right. Maybe we already have it and this is the point we're after, but still. How can I find something I can't find myself? Remember, Apollo, the card that was swapped out was the 5th ace. The 5th ace. Right.
Well, Mr. Justice, the question of why the killer would swap out a card has been raised. Can you point to a reason?
Probably not yet. I don't know. Because it would have made it even more of an impossibility. But then, why does Phoenix have an ace? Did someone put an ace from the blue deck into his hand now? I'm so confused. Let's go not yet. No, not yet, Your Honor.
Not yet? Ha! Pathetic. Not yet. Try not ever.
Well, Mr. Gavin.
Oh, I'm willing to wait for as long as it takes. Great, I don't even know what the heck I'm looking for. Apollo. Yes, sir? Don't forget, you already know the answer. You just don't realize it yet. I already know the answer? Take a moment to think it over again, okay? I'm going to press the rest, and then I'm going to go back to that and present that card. It's a bit confusing. It seems like a bit of a weird stretch at this point in time to say that's why it was switched, because it wouldn't make any sense with all the cards on the table. Wouldn't it have been better to wait for the police to arrive? Remember though, by that time, I was already Wright's defense attorney. It wouldn't do for me to become part of the investigation. That makes sense. What does it? I'm confused.
Well, what happened next?
It's definitely at that point. That's when the call came from Wright. Okay. Press this as well. Where were you when the phone call came? I'd already left the Borscht Bowl Club by that time. On the phone he asked me to defend him. Naturally, I was surprised. I accepted, however. I couldn't abandon him. So kind of you. So far, everything jives with Mr. Wright's testimony, I think. Is it going to be a problem for you to cross-examine your own boss? I'm fine! Who was it that taught me never to pull punches in cross-examination? It was you, Mr. Gavin. I learned it from watching you. So it's obviously at that point, and we got to present something there. The fifth ace is the trump, sure. But it just makes everything not make any sense whatsoever due to the colours of the back of the card. It just makes everything make no sense whatsoever. So let's skip forward to it. Or at least no sense to me. Probably it's sense to everyone else at home. There's quite a lot of text on this one. What possible reason did the real killer have to swap cards in the victim's hand? Wait, what? They weren't playing with the red deck. They were playing with the blue deck. And that ace was a... I'm really confused. I'm so confused. Right, let's present it then. Let's give that fifth ace out. It's now or never. The defense would like to present evidence to the court. Evidence showing the reason why a card was swapped out. Because of the bloodstain, I guess. Then go ahead and point out your reason, Mr. Justice. Why did the killer take the fifth ace? I know I broke the flow of that quite a bit, but trying to get my brain around it is not working. Because it was covered in blood. My reason is, this!
Is that an ace?
Why? Why? It's got blood on it. Right next to the spade. What?
This is insane! Why wasn't I told about this? Why?
Could this be? Could this be the missing fifth ace?
Yeah, but we know that. I'm just wondering where it glues into it. Obviously, it'll glue into it once we start to hear stuff, but still.
Inconceivable. How could you? What are you doing with that card?
Well, that's the thing. Why is Mr. Gavin so upset? It's just a fishy card from some fishy girl. No, that card is mine. That is, I picked it up at the Borscht Bowl Club that night after the murder had occurred. I gave it to my daughter. Cards are a stock in trade after all.
No! Impossible. Unacceptable. The court can't accept this evidence. It's a fraud.
A fraud? How can you be so sure?
What?
I would think the only person who could claim it was a fraud would be the one who took the real card from the crime scene. The real killer. Allow me to elaborate. What if this trace of blood was the reason?
The reason for?
For the killer to take the card from the scene of the crime.
Where are you going with this?
Take another look at the photo and at the victim's head. At the moment of the crime, his hat fell to the floor, and a trickle of blood ran from his forehead down the back of his head. Couldn't a drop of that blood have fallen on one of the cards? I suppose. The killer then took the card to hide the blood. Why?
Regardless, that evidence is non-permissible.
Oh?
Right, regardless of how you wasted the last 7 years, you used to be a lawyer. You know what a serious crime it is to conceal evidence.
Oh? We can discuss the finer points of our legal system later. What's important now is that I've answered your question.
What are you talking about?
You wanted to know why the killer would have taken a card from the crime scene? And now, I've told you. That one drop of blood would have been decisive evidence, you see. This is baseless conjecture! Baseless!
Objection!
Oh, I assure you it's quite based. What? It's amazing, really, how a single drop of blood on a single card can lead us to the truth. It's quite simple. Well, Apollo? Yes? Try picturing the scene of the crime. In your head. Right, we got ourselves a map. Ah! It's going all 3D! The murder took place in the hideout. The body of the luckless victim was found at the poker table. And before the killer swapped a card out, there was a single card with a drop of blood on it in the victim's hand. Given this, there is one decisive problem with this scene.
Well, what is it?
Let's keep it simple, shall we? Given that there was a drop of blood on a card, whose position in this diagram doesn't fit? Alright, so... I don't know. The victims? The killers? The witnesses? The second witnesses? Whose position doesn't fit with the bloody card? The victims, surely. Because it's not going to end up on the table, is it? If it's going down the back of his head, it's going to end up behind there. So where would the victim have to be? Or where would the victim have been? It's got to be that. Well, isn't it the victim's position that's the problem?
I don't follow your logic here, Mr. Justice.
Well, look, the victim was struck on the head, sending him back in his chair. You'd think any blood would fall behind the body, not onto the table in front of him.
Nah!
Take a look at the photo again. If he bled in this position, the blood would fall on the floor, not on the cards.
Why, that's right. So what does this mean?
Incidentally, we were sitting in swivel chairs. Swivel chairs? Oh man. Apollo, try turning the chair around. I could turn the chair around? That's weird. On the bottom screen,
The chair was facing the other way.
it would have to be. So we have to assume that at the time of the murder, the victim's chair was facing away from the table.
When Mr. Wright returned from informing the police, which way was the chair facing?
When I came back to the room, the body was facing as seen in this photo. That would mean the killer turned the chair back around. But there's no space for the killer to attack, either from that position. Let's take the next step. Look at the diagram once more. We know now the victim was facing away from the table at the time of the murder. But this creates another significant contradiction.
Again?
Let's test your reasoning skills again, shall we? Apollo, whose location on this diagram contradicts our new understanding of the crime? The victims, the killers, the witnesses, the second witnesses? Whose location creates a contradiction if the victim was facing away? It's now the killer. The victim was struck from the front, correct? Indeed. Well, wouldn't it be hard for the killer to hit him from the front? Sitting where his indicator currently is? I would think it'd be quite hard, yes.
Yes, but what you're saying makes no sense. Why would the victim suddenly turn to face the wall in the middle of a game?
I believe a sufficient reason will soon come to light.
What?
There's something in this diagram that makes far less sense, actually. Look again at the diagram. Apollo, if the victim was struck while he was sitting as shown here, where would his assailant be standing? Try marking it on the diagram. What? But there's no room to put a mark where the killer should be. Don't worry, let's think it through and see what we find. We know the victim was facing towards the wall at the time of the crime. That's the only thing we know for sure. Try to forget about everything else. Where would the killer have to be standing to strike our victim from the front? This game is a bundle of confusion at most times. The killer had to be standing, well, here.
You get points for flair, but that's about all you get.
I thought I was onto something there too.
I hardly need to point out that standing there would be impossible. The victim is facing a solid cupboard. Or are you claiming the killer climbed the cupboard and hit him from above?
It's simple logic, really. If this was the only place a killer could have been standing, then that means at the very moment of the crime... Wait, I know. At the moment of the crime, the cupboard wasn't there.
What's this now?
I mean, that's the only explanation. Right, Mr. Gavin? Your Honor, I have a suggestion for the defense. We should arrange to examine the cupboard in the hideout immediately.
Bailiff, send a team to the crime scene immediately. Have them trying to move the cupboard.
Your Honor?
What?
There's one more thing your men should look for. Please give this to the bailiff.
Yes, I see. You do belong in the courtroom after all, Mr. Wright.
I do my best. But let's forge ahead here while we wait. Look at the diagram once again. It's been changed. If the killer was standing here at the time of the crime, then this cupboard wasn't here. Which means... Apollo, try moving the cupboard. It blocks the window. Thank you. As you can see, the cupboard was the problem. At the time of the murder, it has to have been as shown here. Now everything is in place to reconstruct the moment of the crime. Oh my. What's this?
What is it now?
Look at the diagram of the crime scene once more. It appears we found yet another contradiction. What I believe to be the final contradiction, in fact. Huh? Oh, dang! Notice something, Apollo? Our line of deduction is rapidly approaching its logical conclusion.
Now then, Mr. Justice, please point to the new contradicting indicator. Is it the victim, the killer, the witness, the second witness? Which indicator in this diagram contradicts what we know about the crime?
Kristoph Gavin's position, of course, Mr. Judge. The DS bringing us fancy new ways to examine a case. About this cupboard. Are we all okay with assuming it was moved? Sure, why not, he says, defending himself. Well, if it was, something really doesn't fit. The cupboard would completely cover up the window to the stairs.
Ah!
That's right, someone standing outside wouldn't be able to see in. Someone like Mr. Gavin.
What did you say?
Oh, is the coolest defense in the West losing his cool? Don't expect me to play along with your little game, right? It's only a game until someone gets killed, Mr. Gavin. And someone was, while the window to that room was blocked by a cupboard. So, Mr. Gavin, perhaps you'd like to explain to the court. Exactly, where did you witness the crime scene from? Excuse me, Your Honor.
That's fast. Order! This is a court of law and I will have order!
We just now received word from our investigative team of the Borscht Bowl Club. They examined the cupboard in the hideout, Your Honor.
Oh? And what did they find?
Well, Your Honor, it turns out there's a secret passage behind it.
What?
Ah, yes. I believe I mentioned something of the sort before. This is one of the tricks to the room many of our regulars know about. I do remember him saying something about that, now that he mentions it. A secret passage is a handy thing to have when you're engaged in illegal goings-on. You never know when you might need to duck away from the eyes of the law. So the room has a secret passage. Where does it go? The other side connects to the restaurant above. The underworld bosses could get away from the cops and enjoy a cold bowl of borscht, no doubt. Just like our killer. And it has to have been a regular. You see where our line of simple deductive reasoning has led us, Apollo? I see it, but I don't believe it. That girl wasn't kidding when she said I needed this trump card for the last hand. I don't think that would be the last hand, though. At the time of the murder, the window was blocked, and the victim's hat was only off his head for the few minutes between Mr. Smith's murder and Mr. Wright's return from calling the cops. In other words, the only place anyone could have seen the victim's bald head was from inside the hideout. Well, Mr. Gavin? Come on, say something! Well, we'll let him say something next episode, as it seems we may have cornered Mr. Gavin, having been in a place that prevents criminals from being cornered. Very poetic, I'm sure. Wax lyrical on your blue cards all you like. But still something doesn't add up about the colours of the card with the blood on it as well. That's... doesn't make sense with the cards we knew were dealt in the hand. So what's going on there? It confused me for a time, but it's still confusing me now. Obviously I had to present that 5th card, but it doesn't make sense. I need to see more cards, really. But what will we get to? Next time on Apollo Justice, Ace Attorney. Kristoph's cornered. Now it's time to deliver the verdict. Bye-bye.